Okay. Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of different individuals from the BAME background. And this week, I am so pleased to have with us Benjamin Fernando. We call him Ben Fernando. And he's going to give us some of his experiences. He was a former student at Imperial College, and now he's at the University of Oxford doing a PhD in Earth Sciences and Astrophysics. Fascinating story. So I'm going to ask Ben if he would just like to, well, welcome him again, but just give us a little bit about his background, his early childhood, etc., and what gives him his sense of belonging and identity. So welcome, Ben.
Oh, cheers, Wayne, and thank you for having me today. It's great to be with you. So, and thanks all for coming as well. I'm Ben, as Wayne said. I'm a PhD student at Oxford at the moment, currently working on the NASA InSight mission to Mars. So you can see it in the background there, one of the selfies that the lander took. So I'm a seismologist, which means that I use the waves that earthquakes produce to study the interior of the Earth, or in this particular case, Mars. So trying to understand how the Earth and Mars came to be the way that they are today. So as I mentioned before, I was at Oxford. I did 4 years in the physics department at Imperial, so doing the integrated masters, and was involved in all sorts of student societies during my time at Imperial. I did University Challenge, I did RAG. It was pretty good fun, actually, and I did enjoy it. Before that, I grew up in Birmingham, actually, so a bit different to London. London, even though Birmingham was a big city, London was even bigger coming here as an undergrad. But it was a pretty cool time growing up in Birmingham. Lots of friends from lots of very different backgrounds as well. And so I guess Wayne asked me what do I feel about belonging, which is a really interesting question. And it's something that, to be honest, I've only really started to consider in a more conscious way since I left Imperial, because Birmingham and London is so multicultural and diverse in some ways. At least as a resident, I never felt particularly out of place there. Mm-hmm. Imperial's not overly diverse, but it's certainly a lot more diverse in terms of ethnicity than Oxford is. So it's something I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about. What does it mean to fit in, and so on and so forth, because especially in my department at Oxford, there aren't an enormous number of people who look like me, which on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't make an enormous difference, but it doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel quite the same as it did when I was at Imperial. So it's a really interesting topic to explore, and thank you for suggesting it. I'm very glad to be here and able to talk to you about it today.
Fantastic. You gave us a really nice overview there of your experiences, but what I'd like to do is just to delve a little bit deeper and go into some of those things a little bit more. Like, for example, you said you grew up in Birmingham. First thing I noticed is that you don't have a Birmingham accent as such, right? So growing up in Birmingham, from your home culture, from the culture around you, you said that you felt like you fitted in. It was fine. What was it about that though made you have that kind of like sense of everything? This is just all right. What was it? Can you put your finger on it at all?
I think it was probably that in Birmingham there were a lot of very different people from very different backgrounds, and the folks I went to school with, everyone from kids whose parents were high-flying doctors and lawyers to kids whose parents drove a taxi or owned a shop or whatnot. So it felt in many ways like background, at least for me, when I was at school, was less of an issue. It didn't matter so much what your parents did or where they'd grown up, where you'd grown up, because there were so many people from different backgrounds there. So it was almost just the sense of not being particularly special, I think, that for me led to a feeling of fitting in quite a lot. As I say, it wasn't really something I particularly considered. When you're a kid, if you feel like you fit in, you don't consider why you shouldn't fit in or why you might not fit in elsewhere. It was only when that was, really taken away and changed that I began to think about some of those things more.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that in the school environment, it was quite heterogeneous in terms of incomes, what the parents did, etc. And so sometimes I feel that when you're in that kind of environment, there is still something which kind of like pulls people away from. Some will fit in, some won't fit in, if that makes sense. So clearly you went to a what kind of school did you go to, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, I went to a private school in Birmingham.
Okay. So the aspirations were that everyone was going to do well, or try to do the best that they can. Do you, in terms of then when you chose what kind of degree you wanted, physics in itself seems to be quite a, I don't know if I'm being stereotypical here, but it's always perceived as kind of like a, I'm thinking of images of Albert Einstein and kind of like more, what was it that attracted you to physics?
I guess I'd always just had a bit of a curiosity about the way that things worked. I thought quite long and hard about really what I wanted to do, whether it wanted to be chemistry, biochemistry probably, rather than just chemistry or physics. And I decided in the end to go down the physics route. I guess I liked the way that the maths fitted into everything.
Right.
The way that it was a way of the methodology of being able to explain both the very small but also the very large was something that was quite appealing to me, actually.
So understanding that it from because when I think of physics, I think, I'll be honest, I think it's quite a challenging subject, but you'd probably differ in your viewpoint. But it helps you to break down the actual nuances of the subject of matter, or of how things fit together.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah. So you also mentioned that when you were at Imperial here, that you, apart from doing doing your degree, you got involved with quite a lot of other activities. Can you explain some of those activities, and what was it attracted you to doing those different activities?
So I guess the biggest part of my life at Imperial, other than my degree, was probably RAG, so raising and giving. I was vice treasurer, treasurer, and chair in 3 successive years. So that took up an enormous amount of time. And it was more a continuation of a lot of work I'd done at school, fundraising for charities, causes that I thought were important. And it was quite nice actually coming to Imperial and finding people who were willing to get stuck in and work on that as well, which actually is something I'd found a little bit less becoming at school. There were a few people who were willing to put time and effort into doing these kinds of things. And it was a good way to get to know the community as well, getting to know everyone from the senior management people right down to the first year undergraduates when I was in my later years. Trying to get them to all work on similar projects was exciting. It was a good way to learn how people work and how to motivate them. And then in addition to that, there was a whole bunch of other stuff. I did University Challenge. I did Tea Society. That was pretty fun. That was mostly literally just having tea, biscuits, and gossiping. I was chair of the Labour Club for a while as well. I think it was probably just a combination of, I enjoyed physics, but it was never for me one of those things that was going to occupy my whole life. It wasn't that attractive. I needed to find something else to stay sane, to be honest.
So physics was almost a vehicle. The physics was a vehicle into the university, but you got your sense of belonging and identity within the different charitable events, or not charitable, the different societal events that you did.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say physics was kind of the routing, but for me, it wasn't the most special or exciting parts of the degree of my time at Imperial in any way.
And so the types of people who you met, as you said, with the RAG activities which you did, meant that you were able to see a whole variety of people at different levels within the organization.
Yeah.
What do you think was the main benefit of that level of interaction?
I think it just teaches you how to deal with different people in an effective way. So with a lot of what we were doing for RAG, it was either asking people for money or asking people to do stuff for us so that we could raise money. Can we put a crane on the Queen's lawn to do a bungee jump? Can we run a fire walk on the terrace outside outside one of the engineering buildings, etc., etc. It required you to learn how to get people to agree with you and how to bring them around to your point of view, but also how to motivate and encourage the volunteers that we had. Because undergrad at Imperial was never a stress-free situation, even at the best of times. So asking people to give up their free time to do stuff with you was always a big ask.
So it sounds to me you developed lots of negotiation and diplomatic skills in order to get people to not necessarily see your point of view, but at least be willing to follow your lead in certain directions. Would that be right in saying that?
Yeah, that's probably a fair way of putting it.
Yeah. So, because I'm just thinking about the kind of things which, can you tell me about some of the activities that you've gone on to do having left Imperial? Because the RAG activities I think are fascinating. By the way, this might be a bit of a cheeky question. How much did you guys averagely raise after a year's activity of the RAG?
I think the turnover of everything that we did on most years was somewhere up at around £100,000.
Pretty good.
I think, yeah, a substantial portion of that was in sponsorship. So, for specific people would raise money from their family to go climb a mountain and they'd give the sponsorship to RAG.
Yeah.
But we used to do, the big ticket events like the bungee jump and our balls would bring in a few £1,000s each. So
fantastic. That's excellent. And just out of interest, this is just out of my curiosity, what kind of activities, because it's raising and giving, so what kind of activities then was the money then used to support, if that makes sense?
So we used to let the students nominate 3 charities, so a local, an international, and a national one each term or each year normally. And sometimes we, if someone really wanted to do, I don't know, something for cancer research, they could do that and we'd support them. But most of our money went to a set of charities that the students could nominate and select from. So it varied, some years it was lots of hospices and for the national ones. Other years it was, I don't remember, a reading program, I think. Obviously the international development ones tended to be more sort of health related. Working in sub-Saharan Africa, I think, was one, another one in India, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds really, really good actually. It sounds really, really good. So I just want to move on from your time at Imperial to now. You've said that you've moved across to Oxford, right? And so now you're at Oxford, the physics department and probably life around Oxford isn't as diverse as what you've been used to in London and Birmingham, right? So how has that impacted on you, or do you think it's impacted you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the changes are there are many of them, and I haven't still quite figured out how I've responded to them, to be honest, because I moved from a physics department primarily to an earth sciences department. So I have a supervisor in both, but I spend most of my time in earth sciences now. And gender diversity is a much bigger issue in physics. So in physics, there are very few female professors, very few female undergrads. In earth sciences, there are some years when there are more female undergrads in a particular year than there are male undergrads. Now, the gender diversity at staff level isn't as great, but it's nowhere near as bad as it is in physics. There are multiple full professors in Oxford who are women.
Yeah. And
the difference is, though, the complete lack of ethnic diversity. There's one person above postdoc level who's from an ethnic minority. And, at Imperial, as I said, there weren't many women who were professors, but there were a few. Like, you had multiple lecturers who were women. At Oxford, at the professorial level in my department, there's one person. Wow. In the undergraduate intake, there are whole cohorts of 4 years that go through. And in those 4 years, there's no one from a Black background, or maybe one person from a South Asian background or an East Asian background.
Wow.
And yes, things are changing, but it's pretty shocking, actually. Yeah. And it's not the overt comments that matter. It's not people saying anything. It's just walking into a room and being the only one who looks like you there. So I've sat on the heads of department committee for the science division in Oxford for 4 years as the student rep.
Yeah.
And in every single one of those meetings over 4 years, I've been the most senior person from an ethnic minority there.
Wow.
None of the heads of department are from ethnic minorities. None of the staff representatives are from ethnic minorities. This isn't just one meeting. This is, 2 meetings a term
Yeah.
for 3 terms for 4 years.
Yeah.
It's pretty shocking, actually.
Yeah.
And I don't think it necessarily is displayed overtly in the sense that, no, it's not people making offensive comments that bothers me or anything. It's more that when we talk about things to do with diversity, it's clear that for many of the people there, they're not against the idea, that they vaguely support what we're doing, but they don't have any concept of what it actually means to walk into a department and realize there's no one on the poster board who looks anything like you.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. That is quite something. So
Yeah, and to be honest, it made me see Imperial in, frankly, a much better light, because Imperial obviously has a lot of problems. There's no denying that. We've seen many of them escalated to national media levels in the last few months, but the attitudes towards, Imperial recognizes, I think, that especially in physics, had a problem with gender diversity. Getting Oxford to recognize it had a much worse problem with ethnic diversity took and is taking a lot longer, I think.
I'm not going to ask you to elaborate on why you think that might be the case, but it sounds quite striking that the bastion, or one of the bastions of higher education and science and research and education full stop, is so undiverse, so homogeneous in one direction, and not just homogeneous. It sounds from what you've said that there's a lack of representation, both in terms of ethnicity and gender representation as well. So what I'm going to ask you about a campaign that you run, and then I'm going to ask you a kind of like a LinkedIn question based on the fact that, to me, you seem like a young activist. So I'm going to just ask you a question. What was the campaign that you ran in Oxford around the application fees, I believe it was?
Yeah, so Oxford in 2007, 2008 introduced a £40, I think it was then, fee that you had to pay to be considered to do a graduate course. And at the time, I think it was the only fee of its kind in the country. Those sorts of things have happened in the US for a long time, but I tend not to take my role models for higher education from the US. And that fee kept going up. So it was increased to £50 and then £60 and then £75. And it's a struggle to find anyone amongst the staff or the students at the junior levels of staff at least who thinks this is a good idea. Because if you apply to 5 universities and they each charge you £75, all of a sudden you've spent half a month's salary if you're working, part-time job in a bar or something, on applications to programs that, let's be honest, if you're from a working class background, you probably don't think you're likely to get into anyway. And I found that really problematic, and there were so many others did too. And we'd taken it up through the endless committees. I mean, Imperial's no different. There's 1,001 committees, and everyone's like, "Oh, yes, we see your point. We should probably have a working group and do a consultation." And 12 years later, we're still having a working group and doing a consultation. So I think a group of us were just like, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to take this to a vote in congregation, which is sort of the governing body of the university. Imperial doesn't quite have an equivalent, but Cambridge, for example, does. And that's what we did. So we basically forced the issue to a vote, and we said, we want you to abolish this application fee by 2024. So you've got, at the time, 5 years to find another source of income to cover the costs of administering graduate applications, because we don't think you should be charging the students for it.
Could I just ask you to just backtrack slightly and go into the governance system which you were just talking about? Because I know the governance system here at Imperial, but if you could just elaborate on the governance system which you were referring to there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the Imperial style bureaucracy of committee over committee over committee with someone important at the top still exists at Oxford. But Oxford has this added thing which is called congregation, which is basically parliament of the university, of which all academics are members, some support staff are members. And because I sort of found a little loophole that because I have a teaching contract at one of the colleges, so I do tutorials,
Yeah.
allowed me to get membership of congregation as well.
Right. Okay. You got in through the back door then. Like it. Go on.
Yes, I mean, I don't think they were expecting to find a student on congregation.
Okay. And so they basically are the decision makers. So they make the decisions overall. So what goes in council goes for the university. So what did you do to influence this problem that you've identified?
So it was a pretty long process. It took even me several years working on it to realize how it was going to go. The first thing that we tried was, the petitions and the open letters to the Vice Chancellor, and none of that really had any effect because it's far too easy to ignore. So from that, we had a team of people who were clearly passionate about this and willing to put some time into getting rid of the fee. And so eventually we realized, you know what, we can do direct action on this. There is a mechanism by which we can force the university's hand, or at least try, right? If we win, the fee disappears. If we lose, well, at least they've had to publicly acknowledge that they think in the climate that we live in, that charging applicants £75 to do a PhD, or to be considered to do a PhD, is the right thing to do. So it was mostly actually about building up that campaign, finding people to work with, putting together our arguments. The actual lobbying part of it, well, we did a lot of it, but the effective bit only took a couple of days. One afternoon of congregation was what it took to finally make the decision.
So can you give us are you bound by secrecies of Oxford?
No, it's all public records.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we wouldn't see some Oxford mafia dons coming in to wheel you away. No, you can't give away any of our secrets. So what was the process like? Who did you get on board in order to get this mass of people to engender change?
Well, this is one of the really surprising things, actually, is you'd imagine that the only people who would be interested would be the postgraduate students, right? But actually, I think once there was an outlet to doing something useful, and I don't mean to be cynical, but like actually useful rather than tweeting about it or signing a letter, which we all knew was going to be ignored, it was quite amazing at some of the people who came out of the woodwork to get on board. Because there were professors, retired professors who said, actually, you know what, I thought this has been a terrible idea for quite some time. There were first-year undergraduates who said, actually, I don't know really much about Oxford, but this strikes me as a problem. And everyone in between, master students, postgrad students, postdocs, junior lecturers, full professors, support staff, everyone, every different group, I would say, there were people who got in touch and said, you know what, this is problematic. And that's kind of what I think was the strongest part of the campaign, is having that diverse group of opinions, because it makes it much harder to dismiss as, a couple of angry postgraduate students on a rant trying to make trouble, when you have a senior professor emailing you to say, hey, Vice Chancellor, this is not okay.
And as a community, we're not willing to accept it, because I think that's the thing which I think is the strength behind what you were able to achieve, that it was the undergraduates, it was the master students, PhD students, junior lecturers, postdocs, full professors, readers, everybody in between. One of the things which I'm really interested in is how you manage to galvanize, because it's one thing having people supporting you, but then you can have people supporting and one's going in one direction, someone else has got an idea going in another direction. What was your strategy, your plan at being able to galvanize and put it into a single direction which would work?
So I think the key was having a good plan in advance. And obviously we responded and changed the plan, and as people gave us different bits of feedback, but it was helpful because we knew, maybe a year before the vote, the plan is to take this to congregation and vote on it. And so when we got other people involved, they could pick particular bits of the project they wanted to work on. Some people wanted to write to lots of different professors and encourage them to vote. Others wanted to do research into, what does the literature have to say about the effect of application fees on on the likelihood of people from disadvantaged backgrounds to apply.
Yeah.
So it was, I think, having a good plan, but then letting people pick off bits of the project that they thought were interesting to run.
Mm-hmm.
Because not everyone could speak or vote in congregations. So if we just restricted it to that, it would have just been the senior academics.
Right.
But, you know, less selling the undergrads and the postgrads, make sure you're outside the meeting protesting about this and making lots of noise so everyone can hear you. That was a good start, for example. So they had that, and they had to run that and manage that. And it was something that they took ownership of and could kind of do what they wanted on.
So I like this strategy, but I also recognize the time commitment that even though you managed to get your almost like your day in court, your day in Congress, as it were, right? It was still a year away from when you found out you were going to, until you were able to actually stand up and deliver your activities. So can you give us a bit of a glimpse? I'm going to do almost like one of the, I'm seeing a kind of, I don't know if you've seen the film The Great Debaters with Denzel Washington. Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already seeing somebody playing your character, right, in a Hollywood movie about how this got broken down, Ben, right? Maybe it will be you, right? But give us a little sense, right, of the day when you guys got together and you're in front of Congress. What happens there in front of the...
So we're very lucky in that this particular ceremony in Oxford is conducted in English, which is unusual because actually quite a lot of them are done in Latin. So, I mean, I think the start of it was just an ordinary day. I mean, you have to go into the office and do work in the morning. It wasn't like we just had the day off and had a party. I think we met about lunchtime and we all walked down together. And of course, you can't just do it in your jeans and a t-shirt. You have to put your gown on and stuff. So get dressed up, meet outside our department, everyone sort of rallying point, hand out banners and posters and things. And then, you know, we printed off thousands of fly sheets giving the arguments, and we stood outside the gates and made sure that everyone who tried to walk into the meeting had to at least walk past us or ignore us, as the administration side did. But so then we did that, and the vote, I think, it was a pretty short debate. We were worried they would try and talk us out, but it started at 2 and it only ran for about 2 hours. And actually, we lost on the floor. So the vote was 100 to 50 on the floor, because you imagine anyone who's in any kind of precarious employment or has teaching responsibilities can't just take the afternoon off to go take part in a vote. So we were reasonably sure we would lose on the day anyway. And we'd actually prepped in advance enough signatures to put it to a postal vote.
Right, okay.
So we then, expecting to lose on the day, forced the issue to a postal vote. Of course, the university wanted to do the postal vote using paper ballots. Why anyone uses paper ballots anymore, I don't know. But then the pandemic happened, so all the paper ballots were stuck in an office and they couldn't open them because nobody was allowed into the office. So it actually took until September. So and the first vote was in March. So it took a full 6 months.
Wow.
After we'd had the first vote to get the result of the second vote.
Yeah. So
which we won. I think it was something like 420 to 380. So it was close, but because it was a postal vote and it was congregation that did it, it's kind of the highest authority in the university. So it can't be overruled now, except if congregation votes to reverse that decision. But I think the university's admitted defeat. So
yeah, fantastic. No, I'm just fascinated by that whole process. I didn't think this is almost like the American general election, apart from you guys weren't storming through Capitol Hill, right? Right. So it was good that you had a strategy in place. I'm just thinking about now the upshot of what happened, right, in the university conceding. What did that then lead to? What was the overall implication of all of your planning, of your activities? What was the overall implications of that?
It was quite profound, actually, because if I'm honest, I've done a lot of this about all sorts of issues over the years, and I've become quite cynical about the effects of things like, frankly, strikes and petitions and Twitter storms, because in a place like Oxford, it very rarely leads to change. You know, the administration is not defeated very often, but it showed that, frankly, a pretty ragtag bunch of academics and PhD students and a couple of professors who didn't really know what they were doing went up against, you know, the machine who, you know, they had people working full time on coordinating response to this campaign, and we in our spare time managed to frankly both outwit them and outvote them. So that was a pretty good feeling. It was kind of brought down to earth pretty quickly though, because I think we announced the win in mid-September, and about 10 days later, Imperial put out this statement saying that they're deciding now to introduce application fees, which was not only like, come on chaps, can you not read the room? But also, do you really think this, after everything that we went through in 2020, is this the sentiment that you think we need to leave with the world? That having heard all these complaints about diversity and the issues with it, the solution is to introduce an application fee?
Then I couldn't agree with you more. The timing doesn't tie up. Yeah, we've got a huge institution in Oxford who've had the application fee, as you said, for about 12, 14 years, who have chosen to abolish it, and yet we then go and introduce it.
And especially you think this was after a summer of at least we all pretending that we all talked and cared about Black Lives Matter, and the university tells us it's changing its crest and all these other things that frankly probably don't make an enormous amount of difference to your working class ethnic minority applicant who's not sure if Imperial's for them.
Yeah.
But what does make a difference is having a £70 fee that you need to pay just for the privilege of being considered.
That's exactly it. The privilege, I like the way that you put it, the privilege of being considered. And I know that a lot of people have, yourself and many others, have voiced their opinion against this decision. And we as Imperial of One have also said that we're not in agreement with this kind of action at this kind of time. I don't think I'd ever be in agreement with it. So, right, I'm coming back to you then, because you managed to get it overturned in Oxford. So can you give us 3 hints and 3 tips that that you would say that, and people online, please take notes, right? What do we need to do, or how would you approach it?
So I wrote to the, whatever his name is now, the provost, Ian Walmsley, because I think he moved from Oxford to Imperial, so he's very much in on all of this. And they have said, I think, that the current application cycle is a pilot. So they were trying out how the fee would work, how the fee would look. The implication being that we'll review it over the summer and decide whether to put it in place. You know, they'll have to make a decision, I presume, sometime between now and July about whether it's in place for 2021-22. So the first thing is there is hope, right? It's a pilot scheme. At least they've said it's a pilot, which suggests that there's room to reverse it. The next thing, I think, is you need to do something that makes them afraid of what the consequences are, right? The reason that Oxford, you know, stand up and look is all of a sudden 1,100 people signed a petition, which was covered in the media, saying, we oppose this elitist and discriminatory measure. And then the university has to come up with a way of saying, actually, no, it's a really good thing that people have to pay £75 to apply, which can then be covered in whichever newspaper, the Daily Mail, not that they did, but how does Oxford sell to the Daily Mail that's charging £75 is a good thing? So making sure you push that out as widely as possible is important. I would say start now, right? Because they'll make an announcement that the fee is going to continue maybe August, just before they start charging it for people. It's too late by that point. The other thing is about 330 alumni we wrote. So, you know, alumni spanning literally 50 years of Imperial, people who graduated back in the 70s to people who graduated last year. And we said, we're not going to donate any money to the college until you remove this fee. Because that fee, well, if it brings in a couple £1 million of income for you, you clearly don't need our money. So we'll go elsewhere. And they said, oh, you know, we want to work with you on graduate access issues. And I'm like, okay, well, start by removing the fee. And then we'll have a discussion about how we can contribute. Because, you know, an institution like Imperial with hundreds of thousands of alumni, if they put their mind to it, they could raise a lot more than £2 million. But we said, we're gonna stop. Actually, we're not going to help you until you do something about this. So you've really got to put together a campaign that makes it clear to them that it's going to get negative attention in the media, and it will hit them where it hurts. And it's hard, right? Because you don't want to put an applicant off applying to a degree in your department because they see the fee and see what you've said about it. But the truth is, if you don't stand up to it, the fee will increase next year or the year after. And before you know it, it'll be £100 per master's project that you want to apply to. So I would say start now. You know, we had a lot of momentum in September and October. Understandably, people are exhausted, but kind of need to start pushing on this again. I don't know enough about how the governance structures in Imperial work. It's worth looking into, because very often there are back doors where you can force votes or whatnot on certain issues. And then the other thing is, you know, if the collective action fails, you can take individual grassroots action. So if the Department of Medicine announces it's going to subsidize all of the applications for people in its department by a grassroots funding campaign that the PhD students run, it's going to make the other departments look pretty bad, isn't it? If, you know, you've got PhD student on £15,000 a year agrees to give 20 quid a year to help other applicants apply, whereas the university with an endowment of several hundred million has decided they can't afford it. So if you don't get what you want with the direct action, then you have to say, okay, well now within departments or within research groups, this is the action that we're going to take to help students we think deserve a place or deserve to at least be considered. It's hard, it takes time, but if it's just kind of left as, oh, college leadership, think about it, can be 100% sure that fee will not only be retained, but be expanded.
Brilliant. That's Ben, I've got so many other questions, but it's the time of the conversation where I have to open it up to the other people who are listening. Normally I'm not, but I've got my, sorry guys, I'm going to hand over any questions from any of our listeners. No, it looks like they're happy for me to keep going. All right. Was that? Oh, Medina, go ahead. You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, too excited. Hi, both of you. Thanks for the really interesting talk. Nice to see you, Ben, again. Ben and I actually did our undergrads at the same time, so it's nice to see the.
There must be something in the water then. Carry on anyhow.
Yeah, and here we are again. It's really interesting to hear of your experience in Oxford as a PhD student, because I stayed at Imperial to do my PhD, so just like being able to see our different experiences, but also obviously as alumni, similarities as well. I guess one thing I would ask is, I mean, you're a PhD student doing all of this, so obviously this isn't your full-time job, and just thinking about like what impact that's had on your experience as a PhD student, you know, maybe with your relationships with your colleagues or your supervisor, if you could just speak a bit about that.
Yeah. So I think I've given a couple talks about, you know, this campaign and how it worked. And the final thing I say, and I don't say it to try and be cynical or blasé, is try and have fun. Like, it sounds a bit silly, but when you're working with a group of like-minded individuals on a cause that you all care about, even though it's frustrating, it's actually quite enjoyable. And that made a big difference. Is that, you know, it's not like we were going down to the pub. I think we went down to the pub once after the vote, but being in an environment where there are people who think like you and are willing to put, you know, the work in where it counts, it was actually pretty enjoyable. So yes, it took time, and yes, it was extremely frustrating, but once we gave up on the committees and decided on the mass action, it was actually quite fulfilling, because different people doing what mattered to them and coming together to make a difference. I found that quite empowering in a way. On this issue, I think my supervisors were actually pretty much on side with it. That was the thing, is that even the faculty, at least the junior faculty, all agreed that it was a terrible idea to have an application fee. So in a way, you know, the number of emails we got from people saying, I really support your campaign, I think it actually brought the staff and the students together in a way that doesn't happen very often. Because most things at a university, same at Imperial, right? It's always us versus them. The staff go on strike, the students kind of understand it, but they feel like their teaching is suffering. the students are unhappy about tuition fees, but the staff realise they're not going to get paid if there's no tuition fees. Whereas here, this was something where it kind of showed that staff and students working together, even if we frankly have no idea what we're really doing, you know, we're up against the machine. It's a very powerful force to get a lot of motivated, passionate, intelligent people in a room and then try and stand up to them on the basis of a very flimsy set of arguments. So yes, it took time, and yes, I got less work done, but again, you learn enormous amounts of skills in terms of dealing with people. And actually, at the end of it, it was pretty enjoyable to do because you were working with people who were nice.
Yeah, that's a really great answer. Thanks. I think, yeah, it just to me shows the importance of having community, and especially when we're talking about you know, underrepresentation. And sometimes if you feel like you're the only one, that makes it so much harder. So yeah, no, that's a really valuable point. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would say that the community is really important, like you say, because once the movement is going, there'll be people who crawl out of the woodwork to get on board and support you, who you never imagined would. And I think I mentioned to Wayne, you know, there's professors who've been at Oxford, senior, frankly, white men, been at Oxford, done their undergraduate there, 40, 50 years maybe at the time they've been involved, and they say, actually, you know what, I think this is an issue. So it's quite incredible when you build the community in a way that appeals to people, in a way that seems inclusive. You'll find people who would have been put off for a completely different reason than ethnicity, for example. People who are the first ones in their family to go to university, but now senior professors, will turn around and say, yeah, I agree with you, this is as much of an issue. So not only is the community important, but I think, you know, things like this, projects like this, can actually help build that community too.
I agree with that 100%. I think what your example shows is that you had that level of diversity. And I think I said it to you the other day. It was like the power in the, what did I put? The power from a united diversity. So the fact that your power came from the diverse voices and that were in the room and who had that common cause. Although backgrounds, everything else may be different, it was galvanized around something which everyone was in agreement was wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the fact that they had that collective voice meant that you had the power to push, even though, as you said, we may not have known what we were actually planning to do or what we were doing, but we were able to push and push over one of the edifices of this country, you know, to make that change. I think that that's absolutely brilliant, you know. I don't know what you're doing in physics, right? I don't know what you're doing in physics, because I think politics and strategic thinking may well be more suitable, right? Because I think the way in which you've galvanized so many people is absolutely brilliant. And the points of view which you, no, credit where credit's due, credit where credit's due. The points which you articulated and highlighted about where to from here in terms of the application fees at Imperial are very clear and logical steps which we can take, which can be easily taken to push our cause forward. So I want to say a big thank you for all of your hard work. What are you planning next? What's your next big plan? Can we get a heads up, and how can we help?
I'm applying for jobs at the moment, which is proving exciting. Not the best time to be looking for jobs, but once that's done, I think it's, you know, Oxford can sort out some of its other problems on its own. I think I'm actually keen, you know, where I can and where other alumni like Medina himself can help. Where can we help with this campaign against the fee? Because, you know, there are many things, and I understand even people on this call will have different causes they're passionate about at Imperial, but this is one where I think it needs action now. You know, 6 months' time, it will probably be too late. And once it's in place permanently, you don't want it to be 15 or 20 years before someone takes another look at it. Yeah. So there's an opportunity now to get stuck in and help on this. But equally, I realise I'm not the one to lead on it because I'm not at Imperial anymore. I don't know the people anymore. I don't know the institution, but
Mhm.
I'm sure there are folks on this call, you know, who are maybe able to tell me, you know, what can I and the other alumni who got in touch do to help? Because how many people have you honestly spoken to who think that this fee is a good idea? I can count one, and that was the provost.
We'll say no more on that. Ben, I'm going to leave it there because I'm still working at Imperial. So, you know, my P45, I'm not quite ready. Right? But Ben, thank you so much. Right? It's been an absolute pleasure having you on with us today. And as I say, anything that we can do to help to support any causes which you're doing, right? It's interesting that as the interview unfolded for me anyhow, I saw how the things which you had taken up as a young student, i.e. being involved with various activities, communal activities, right, has actually kind of like been the framework or the platform for the kind of things which you're doing now. So the things about raising and giving, the rag stuff which you had done, all of those things, it was like preparation. And had you not volunteered for those kinds of things, you may not have been in a position to galvanize people the way that you did. So what I like about that is the fact that you seized your opportunities. You took your opportunities, you learned from them, and even when you didn't know that it was in preparation, it did prepare you for something which has been really, all I can say, it's been a pleasure that you did what you did in being able to get those fees overturned in Oxford. So as far as I'm concerned, that's worth a round of applause because you're doing a brilliant job, yeah? So thank you very much, Ben. I'm just gonna do my close out now, but thank you so much, yeah?
Thank you.
So well, not next week, next week's Good Friday. So we won't be having a session next week, but the next session that we will have, oops, sorry, wrong date. It should say the 9th of March. Bit of a typo there. The 9th of March, we're going to have an award-winning illustrator, Dapo. Dapo is going to be with us. Okay, so he's going to be with us in 2 weeks' time when we resume. And if you've missed any of the conversations, including any of the other conversations which we've had, then you can find it at our tiny URL, belonging.ioa. So once again, I want to just say big thank you for joining us, and join us again in a couple weeks' time. And if I don't see you before, have a good Easter break. Thanks very much.